She sat on the small, padded bench, the cool plastic of the keyboard cover a familiar comfort under her fingertips. The air in the hall smelled of a mix of things, the sweet, heavy scent of lilies and roses from the centerpieces, the faint, greasy aroma of the chicken dinner that had just been cleared away, and the clean, sharp smell of floor cleaner. It was a smell she knew well, the scent of a job. For her, this was just another Saturday night. Her name was Alina. She was a musician who had become an expert at being almost invisible. Alina hadn't always been this way. There was a time, not so long ago, when her music was a fire. She remembered standing on a stage in a smoky bar, her voice raw and powerful, her hands flying across the piano keys as a small crowd cheered her on. She wrote her own songs then, songs about heartbreak and hope. Songs that felt like they were being torn right out of her chest. She had a band, a dream, and a belief that her music could change the world, or at least a small part of it. But the world is a tough place for a dream. The band broke up, money got tight, and the fire that once burned so brightly had been carefully banked, reduced to a small, controlled flame that was just enough to warm her hands, but not enough to set anything ablaze. Now, her music was a service. She was the background hum to other people's most important moments. She played for couples who wanted elegance without the enormous price tag of a full band. She provided the gentle soundtrack for corporate events, where the goal was for the music to be heard and not felt. A pleasant sound to fill the empty spaces between conversations. She was good at it. She was a professional. Being a professional meant she could read a room in seconds. She knew when to play something soft and classical, when to switch to a light jazz tune, and when to fade into the background completely so that a toast could be made. She was a human-shaped radio, perfectly tuned to the desires of others. Tonight's wedding was nice. The bride and groom, a young couple named Maya and Ben, had been sweet and a little nervous when they'd met her a few months ago. They had a small budget, but big hearts. Alina could see it in the little details of the reception hall. The tablecloths were a little wrinkled, probably rented and unfolded by helpful family members. The centerpieces were beautiful, but clearly DIY mason jars filled with fairy lights and baby's breath. It was the kind of wedding that felt personal and real, and Alina respected that. They had been very specific with her request. "We just want nice, soft background music," Maya had said, her eyes wide with the stress of planning. "Nothing too loud or flashy, just..." Pretty Alina had nodded and given her most reassuring smile. Of course, she had said. "I understand completely." No, she did understand. So she began to play. Her fingers moved over the keys with a practiced ease, playing a gentle, flowing melody that was as soft as a whisper. It was a piece she had played 100 times before, a simple arrangement of a popular love song that was recognizable but not distracting. It was musical wallpaper, and that was exactly what she was paid to be. She watched the guests out of the corner of her eye. They were laughing and talking, their voices a low, happy rumble that blended perfectly with her music. No one was really listening. They were just feeling the gentle mood she was creating. A part of her, a very small and quiet part, felt a pang of something. It wasn't quite sadness, and it wasn't quite boredom. It was more like a sense of fading, of becoming part of the furniture. She was here, in the middle of all this life and celebration. But she was separate from it, sealed behind her keyboard and her gentle, unobtrusive melodies. She finished one song and flowed directly into another, this one a light, airy classical piece. Her voice, when she sang, was soft and smooth, blending with the notes from the keyboard. She didn't put too much emotion into it. Emotion was risky. Emotion made people turn their heads. Emotion made you stand out. And her job was to blend in. She thought about the old days, about the smoky bar and the cheering crowd. She wondered what those people were doing now. She wondered where her bandmates were. A faint, tired smile touched her lips as she remembered the lead guitarist. A goofy guy with a wild mop of hair who was convinced they were going to be famous. He was probably an accountant now, she thought. Or maybe he was still chasing the dream. The thought was a small, sad bubble that rose and popped in her mind before she pushed it away. There was no room for that here. Here, she was not the artist. She was the ambiance. She watched as Maya and Ben moved from table to table, greeting their guests. They were so young, so full of a bright, shining hope that was almost painful to look at. They held hands like they were afraid to let go, their faces lit up with genuine, unfiltered joy. They were in the center of their own perfect world, and Alina was just the soundtrack to it. She played on, her fingers dancing their careful, controlled dance. The song she was playing now was a simple, repetitive tune, easy to ignore. She could have played it with her eyes closed, and sometimes she did, just to give herself a small, private moment of escape. But tonight, she kept her eyes open, watching the happy couple, watching their friends and family laugh and celebrate. She was a ghost at the feast. A quiet observer whose own story was paused while everyone else's was playing out in vibrant color. The plates were gone now. The tables were being wiped down by the venue staff, and the mood in the room was shifting. The formal part of the evening was over, and the party was about to begin. Alina knew what that meant. It was almost time for the first dance. She took a quiet breath, her fingers ready to play the next song on her list, waiting for the night to move on to its next predictable, perfectly planned moment. The last of the dinner plates were cleared away by a team of quiet, efficient staff members who moved like shadows through the now spacious room. The low rumble of conversation changed its tone. It was no longer the comfortable chatter of people sharing a meal, but the higher, more excited buzz of a party waiting to begin. Near the edge of the dance floor, a young man in a neat t-shirt was setting up his DJ equipment. Alina recognized him from earlier. He was a friend of the groom's family. He gave her a quick, friendly nod as he plugged in a cable, and she nodded back. It was the silent signal of a shift change. Her time as the invisible background music was almost over. Soon, the loud, thumping beats would take over, and she could pack up her keyboard and go home. She felt the familiar, gentle pull of that thought, the promise of her quiet apartment, a cup of tea, and the end of another professional but unremarkable day. She played one last soft instrumental piece, a gentle melody that was designed to fade away as the focus of the room shifted. Her fingers moved automatically, her mind already halfway out the door. She watched the guests, seeing how they were turning in their seats, their eyes drifting towards the empty dance floor and the DJ who was now adjusting his headphones. It was a predictable rhythm, a part of the wedding script she knew by heart. She was just a small part of the first act, a warm-up act for the real party. Then she saw her. The bride, Maya, was making her way through the tables. She moved with a kind of nervous grace, one hand holding the delicate train of her dress so it wouldn't drag on the floor. She stopped to say a quick word to an older woman, probably a grandmother, who patted her hand and beamed with pride. As Maya got closer, Alina could see the happy flush on her cheeks and the bright, slightly overwhelmed look in her eyes. This was it, the moment for the first dance. Alina's professional mask slid smoothly into place. She softened her playing, letting the current song wind down to a natural, quiet end. Maya arrived at her small setup, a little out of breath. "Hi, Alina," she said, her voice a soft whisper that was full of excitement. "Hi, Maya," Alina replied, her own voice warm and calm. She stopped playing, letting the final note hang in the air for a moment before disappearing. "You look absolutely beautiful." A genuine, grateful smile lit up Maya's face. "Thank you," she said, her eyes shining. "You've been so wonderful tonight." "Everyone is commenting on how lovely the music is." Alina gave a small, modest shrug. "It's my pleasure. You and Ben have a beautiful group of family and friends." It was the kind of polite, slightly generic thing she always said, but tonight she actually meant it. There was a warmth and genuine affection in this room that she didn't always feel. Maya took a small breath, her nervousness showing in the way she twisted her hands together in front of her. "So we're ready for our first dance," she said, her voice dropping a little, becoming more serious. "If you are, of course." "Of course," Alina said with a reassuring nod. "Whenever you're ready," Maya said, and she seemed to gather a little bit of courage. "We were hoping you could play All of Me by John Legend. It's our song." She said the words "our song" with such reverence, as if it were a sacred phrase. Alina felt a familiar, tiny pang of weariness. It was the most requested first dance song of the year, maybe even of the decade. She knew every note, every lyric, every possible way to play it. She could probably perform it backwards if asked. Maya must have seen a flicker of something in her expression, because she quickly added, "We just want a really simple, sweet version. Nothing too big or fancy, you know? Just gentle. It's a really special song for us, and we just want it to be about the moment, not a big performance." Her eyes pleaded with Alina to understand. This wasn't just a song request. It was a request for a feeling. A request for a memory. Elena's professional mask became a perfect fit. She smiled warmly, a smile that reached her eyes and conveyed nothing but confidence and understanding. "Maya, it would be my honor. It's a beautiful song and a perfect choice. Simple and sweet. I can absolutely do that for you." The relief that washed over Maya's face was so real and so potent that it made the tired feeling in Elena's chest fade away. This wasn't about her boredom with the song. This was about this young woman's once-in-a-lifetime moment. "Oh, thank you, Maya," breathed, her shoulders relaxing. "Thank you so much." She gave Alina another brilliant smile and then turned to walk back to her groom. Alina watched her go. Ben was standing by the edge of the dance floor, his hands in his pockets, watching his bride with an expression of pure adoration. As Maya reached him, he took her hands in his, and they just looked at each other for a long moment, lost in their own world. The room seemed to hold its breath. Alina saw the DJ give her a final nod, a silent signal that he was ready to take over after she was done. The guests had all turned their chairs to face the dance floor. The spotlight, which had been illuminating the head table, now shifted to the empty space in the center of the room. Alina turned her attention back to her keyboard. Her fingers, which had been playing so mechanically just moments before, now felt a little more sensitive. She quickly selected the right file from her digital library. She had several arrangements of the song, but she chose the one that was the most basic, the most stripped down. Just a simple piano accompaniment and a single vocal line. No fancy harmonies, no instrumental breaks, exactly as requested. She took a quiet, centering breath, the way she used to before going on stage at that smoky bar all those years ago. For a brief second, the memory was so vivid she could almost smell the stale beer and hear the clink of glasses. Then it was gone, replaced by the scent of lilies and the sight of a young couple in love, waiting for their song to begin. She was ready. She was going to give them exactly what they asked for, a simple, sweet, and perfectly forgettable performance. Her fingers found the starting notes, and the first gentle chords of All of Me filled the quiet hall. It was exactly as she had planned, exactly as Maya had requested. The sound was soft, clear, and romantic. It was a musical blanket, meant to wrap the couple in a warm, safe feeling as they began their first dance as husband and wife. Ben took Maya in his arms, and they started to sway a little stiffly at first. Then more naturally as the music settled around them. Alina watched them, her expression neutral and professional. She was a provider of a service, and this was the delivery. She began to sing, her voice a smooth, controlled whisper. "What would I do without your smart mouth?" Her voice was like velvet, pleasant and unobtrusive. It was the kind of voice that didn't demand attention, but simply offered its presence. The guests watched with soft, affectionate smiles. Some were whispering to each other, others were holding up their phones to record the moment. But their focus was entirely on the couple in the center of the room. Alina was, as intended, a part of the scenery. She sang the lines perfectly, hitting every note with a precision that came from thousands of hours of practice. Drawing me in, and you kicking me out. You've got my head spinning, no kidding, I can't pin you down. The lyrics were sweet and the melody was simple. It was a perfect, safe, and entirely predictable performance. But as she sang, something started to happen. It wasn't a decision, not at first. It was more like a shift in her focus. She was no longer just looking at the couple. She was truly seeing them. She saw the way Ben's hand rested on the small of Maya's back. Not just holding her, but protecting her, as if he were shielding her from the whole world. She saw the way Maya had her head tucked into Ben's shoulder. Her eyes closed, a look of pure, unadulterated peace on her face. She saw the tiny, almost invisible smile that played on Ben's lips as he looked down at the top of his wife's head. These weren't just two people performing a ritual. This was real. This was a moment of such intense private love that it felt almost wrong for so many people to be watching. A memory, unbidden, surfaced in Elena's mind. It was a memory of her own, of a time long ago when she had felt that same way. She remembered standing in a tiny, cramped kitchen with a boy she thought she would love forever. He was trying to teach her how to cook pasta, and she had gotten flour all over her face and in his hair. They were laughing so hard they could barely breathe, and in that moment, the world outside that tiny kitchen had ceased to exist. It was just the two of them, covered in flour and lost in a bubble of happiness. The memory was so sharp, so real, that for a second, she felt the phantom sensation of flour on her cheeks. The feeling was a mix of warmth and a deep, lingering ache, the professional part of her brain. The part that was wired to follow instructions and be invisible told her to shake it off. Stick to the script, it seemed to whisper. They asked for simple, give them simple, but the artist, the part of her she had locked away so long ago, was waking up. That part of her looked at the couple and didn't see a job. It saw a story. It saw a universe of meaning in the way they held each other. It heard the truth in the lyrics she was singing, a truth that went far beyond a simple pop song. She reached the chorus, "'Cause all of me loves all of you. Love your curves and all your edges, all your perfect imperfections." She sang the word all, something changed. It was a small thing, almost unnoticeable to anyone who wasn't really listening. She added a harmony. It was just a single lower note that ran underneath the main melody, a note that gave the words a new depth, a new weight. It was a richer, more complex sound than the simple arrangement she had planned. Her voice, which had been a soft whisper, gained a little bit of soul. It was a flicker of something more. The effect was immediate, though subtle. A few guests who had been looking down at their phones or whispering to their neighbors lifted their heads. Their expressions changed from polite interest to genuine engagement. The father of the bride, a man with a kind face and a graying mustache, stopped fiddling with his camera and just watched, his hand resting on his wife's shoulder. On the dance floor, Ben and Maya seemed to feel it too. They pulled each other just a little bit closer, their swaying becoming less of a dance and more of an embrace. The music was no longer just a backdrop for their moment. It was becoming a part of it. The flicker had sparked something in Alina. It was a tiny spark, but it was enough to warm a part of her that had been cold for a very long time. She felt a connection not just to the couple, but to the music itself. She was no longer just reciting the lyrics. She was starting to feel them. She sang the second verse, her voice still soft, but now it carried a new texture, a new emotion. "What's going on in that beautiful mind? I'm on your magical mystery ride." She looked at Maya's face, still tucked against Ben, and imagined the world of thoughts and dreams and fears that were in her head. She looked at Ben and saw the wonder in his eyes as he looked at the woman he had just married. The song wasn't just about them anymore. It was about every couple who had ever been so deeply in love that they became each other's entire world. It was about the boy in the flour-dusted kitchen. It was about the fire she used to have. She played the second chorus, and this time the harmony was a little bolder. The soulful inflection in her voice was a little clearer. The room was quieter now. The whispers had stopped. The phones had been lowered. More and more people were just watching, listening, drawn in by the subtle current that was now running through the song. Alina felt a strange mix of fear and exhilaration. She was breaking the rules. She was not giving them what they asked for. But she was giving them something that felt more real, more true. She was finishing the chorus, the last note hanging in the air. The professional, predictable part of the song was over. The plan was to go back to the soft, gentle verse. But her fingers, hovering over the keys, had a different idea. The artist inside her, now fully awake, was ready to speak. The simple song was about to become something else entirely. Her fingers, which had been poised to return to the gentle, predictable verse, did something else entirely. Instead of the familiar chords, a cascade of notes flowed from the keyboard, a complex, shimmering arpeggio that was like nothing in the original song. It was a sound that belonged in a grand concert hall, not a modest wedding reception. It was classical, intricate, and utterly unexpected. For a split second, there was a flicker of confusion in the room. A few guests glanced at each other, their brows furrowed. The DJ, who was leaning against his table, straightened up, a look of surprise on his face. But the confusion lasted only a moment. The notes were too beautiful, too full of emotion to be a mistake. On the dance floor, Ben and Maya stopped their gentle swaying. They stood frozen for a moment, just listening. Then Maya pulled back slightly, her face turned up towards Ben, her eyes wide with wonder. He looked down at her, his own expression a mixture of shock and awe. They were no longer dancing a rehearsed first dance. They were caught in the middle of something spontaneous and magical. The music was no longer a backdrop for their moment. It was the very heart of it. Alina was no longer in control. Not in the way she had been before. This was a different kind of control, a deeper one. It was the feeling of being a vessel for something much bigger than herself. Her hands moved across the keys with a confidence and grace she hadn't felt in years. The classical-sounding bridge she was creating was a conversation between the notes, a story being told without a single word. It built in intensity, layer by layer, each phrase more complex and more emotional than the last. She was weaving a new melody out of the old one, transforming it from a simple pop song into something profound. And then she began to sing again. But it wasn't the soft, controlled voice from the beginning of the song. This was a voice that had been set free. It started low, a rich, soulful hum that vibrated with a raw, untamed power. As the music from the keyboard swelled, her voice rose with it. She wasn't just singing the lyrics anymore. She was reinterpreting them, pouring every ounce of her hidden passion, her forgotten dreams, and her deeply buried heartache into every single note. The words, "All of me loves all of you," were no longer a sweet declaration. They were a powerful, soul-shaking testament. The entire reception hall had fallen into a state of absolute, stunned silence. It was a quiet so deep that it felt sacred. The clinking of glasses had stopped. The low hum of conversation had vanished. A man who was about to take a sip of his drink froze with the glass halfway to his lips, his eyes fixed on the woman in the corner. Phones that had been held up to record the moment were now lowered, their owners completely captivated. People who had been chatting at the bar turned around, their faces lit by the soft stage lights, their expressions rapt. Every single person in the room was under a spell. Elena's eyes were closed now. She wasn't seeing the room anymore. She was seeing the smoky bar where she used to sing, feeling the sticky floor under her shoes, hearing the roar of the small crowd. She was seeing the faces of her old bandmates, feeling the shared energy of creating something real and raw together. She was thinking about the boy in the kitchen with the flour, the hope she once felt, the heartbreak that followed, and the long, slow quiet that came after. All of it, the joy and the pain, the fire and the ashes, was flowing out of her through the music. She was no longer the background musician. She was the artist. She was the showstopper. The song reached its peak. Elena's voice soared, a clear, powerful, and impossibly beautiful sound that filled every corner of the hall. It was a voice that could have shattered glass, but instead, it seemed to mend something in the air. In the hearts of everyone listening, she held a long, incredible note, a sound that seemed to hang in the air, shimmering with pure emotion. It was the sound of a soul laid bare. On the dance floor, Maya was crying openly, her face buried in Ben's chest. He was holding her tightly, his own eyes wet with tears as he watched Alina, a look of profound gratitude on his face. The bride's mother was dabbing her eyes with a napkin, and the groom's father had his arm around her, his own face a mask of emotional awe. Then, as suddenly as it had exploded, the music began to recede. The powerful chords softened, the soaring melody descended, and Elena's voice, which had been a roaring fire, subsided into a single, pure, and breathtakingly soft note. It was the quietest sound she had made all night, but it was the most powerful. She held it for a long moment, a final, gentle whisper that seemed to settle over the room like a blanket of snow, and then she let it go. The last note faded into silence, leaving behind a space that felt both empty and completely full. The song was over. The spell was broken, but the world, for everyone in that room, felt somehow different. The quiet professional had stepped out of the shadows, and in doing so, had illuminated the entire room. The last note faded, but it didn't just disappear. It seemed to hang in the air, a tiny, shimmering thread of sound that connected every person in the room. For a full 5 seconds, there was nothing. No one moved. No one spoke. It was a silence so complete and so profound that it felt louder than any noise. A waiter, who had been about to clear a nearby table, stood frozen with a handful of empty glasses. The DJ, with his hand halfway to his mixer, stared with his mouth slightly open. People who had been smiling now looked simply stunned, their eyes wide, their minds trying to process what they had just witnessed. It was the kind of silence that follows a lightning strike, a moment of shared awe where the world seems to stop turning. In the center of the floor, Ben and Maya held each other, their bodies still, their faces wet with tears. They were the eye of the storm, the quiet center around which this incredible moment revolved. Then, a single sound broke the spell. It was a sharp, clear clap from the back of the room. From an older man in a tweed jacket who had been watching with a look of intense concentration. It was a solitary, decisive sound. And then, like a dam breaking, the room erupted. It wasn't just polite applause. It was a thunderous, emotional explosion of sound. People were on their feet, cheering and whistling. The sound was so loud it seemed to shake the very walls of the modest hall. It was a wave of pure, unadulterated appreciation that crashed over Alina, who was still sitting on her bench, her hands resting on the keys as if she were afraid to move. The noise was overwhelming, a physical force that made her heart pound in her chest. She looked out at a sea of smiling, tear-streaked faces all turned towards her. The invisible woman was, for one night, the only person anyone could see. Through the wall of sound, a figure broke away from the crowd. It was Ben. He was striding towards her, his long legs covering the distance quickly. His face was a mess of emotions, shock, gratitude, and a kind of joy that was so pure it was almost painful to look at. He reached her setup and didn't say a word at first. He just reached out and shook her hand, his grip firm and warm. His eyes met hers, and she saw in them a depth of understanding that surprised her. He wasn't just thanking a musician. He was thanking someone who had understood the depth of his love for his wife and had given it a voice. That was... He started, then shook his head, as if the words were inadequate. That was the most beautiful thing I have ever heard. Thank you. His voice was thick with emotion. Before Alina could even form a response, Maya was there too. She launched herself at Alina, wrapping her in a tight, heartfelt hug that smelled of perfume and happiness. "Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you," Maya whispered into her shoulder, her body trembling with sobs. "You made our moment. You didn't just play a song. You made it magical. It was perfect. It was more than perfect." Alina, stunned and overwhelmed, hugged her back, feeling the bride's tears soak through the shoulder of her blouse. In that moment, all the years of playing background music, of being invisible, melted away. This was why she had started playing music in the first place. Not for fame or for money, but for this to connect with people on a level so deep that words failed, as Maya pulled back. Wiping her eyes with the back of her hand, a line began to form. It started with a few guests who wanted to shake her hand or say a quick word of thanks, but it quickly grew. An elderly woman with silver hair took Elena's hand in both of hers and said, "My dear, you have a gift from God. Don't you ever let anyone tell you otherwise." The young woman, probably one of the bridesmaids, asked, "Do you have a CD? A website? Anything? My fiancé and I need to book you, like right now." A man in a business suit handed her his business card. "I don't know what you do for a living, but if you ever want to record an album, I have a small studio. We should talk." Elena was in a daze. She took cards, accepted compliments, and smiled until her cheeks hurt. But a part of her felt like she was watching herself from a distance. This was the kind of attention she had once dreamed of, but it felt different than she had imagined. It wasn't about her ego. It was about the shared experience. These people weren't just fans. They were fellow witnesses to a miracle. She answered their questions as best she could, her voice soft and a little shaky. She didn't have a website, she told them. She didn't have a CD. She was just a musician who played at weddings. The words felt strange and inadequate now. Finally, the crowd began to thin as the DJ started up his first song, a loud, upbeat dance track that signaled the shift to the party part of the evening. The spell was officially broken. Alina began the slow, methodical process of packing up her equipment. She coiled the cables with practiced hands, zipped up her keyboard in its protective case, and folded her music stand. The motions were familiar, comforting, but they felt different now. The keyboard, which had often felt like a tool, a means to an end, now felt like a part of her, a vessel for something sacred. As she worked, a few people still came up to her, offering one last word of praise before heading to the dance floor, driving home that night. The city lights a blur through her windshield. Alina didn't feel the usual exhaustion that settled in after a long gig. She felt alive. A vibrant, humming energy coursed through her veins. She thought about the bride and groom, their tear-streaked faces, their heartfelt thanks. She thought about the line of guests, their genuine admiration. But mostly, she thought about the music. She thought about the moment she let go, the moment she stopped following the script and let the music take over. It was a risk, a huge one. She could have embarrassed herself. She could have ruined their special moment. But she hadn't. She had trusted her instincts, and her instincts had led her to something beautiful. She remembered the fire she used to have, the passion that drove her to play in smoky bars for next to nothing. She realized now that the fire had never gone out. It had just been buried under layers of practicality, disappointment, and the need to pay the bills. Tonight, she had cleared away the ashes and blown on the embers. The fire had roared back to life, brighter and more powerful than ever before. She had given the bride and groom more than they asked for. And in doing so, she had given a piece of herself back to herself. She was no longer just a background musician. She was an artist. And as she drove through the quiet streets, a small, real smile touched her lips. It was the smile of someone who had remembered who she was, and who knew, with a deep and unshakable certainty, she would never be able to forget again.